Guys, we are live. We are back with the CMBT podcast. Tell you what, man, I'm really excited that we're doing this, and I'm excited to be doing it with you. Guys, meet Rhys. He is my new co-host for this podcast. Rhys is the marketing manager for CMBT. He's also a boxing coach out of our CMBT training center, and just an all-round epic dude that I cannot wait to have some good conversations with, and for you guys to hear his beautiful voice.
Well, thanks, Millie. That warm welcome. Yeah, definitely won't be the first time that you and I have had a chat, but having the camera on, having a microphone in front of me is a bit of a new one. So, totally. But yeah, it's nice to be in the studio, sort of bit surreal.
100%.
Hearing my own voice and having a microphone in front of my face, so hopefully
it's going to be awesome, brother. And guys, Sel, most of you guys know Sel. Sel's one of the founders of CMBT. He'll be on the episodes. I know you guys will want to hear from Sel as well. He'll jump in when he can. At the moment, he's working as the CEO of another one of our businesses, which is doing great things and kicking goals. And we'll try and steal him from that business every now and then to have a chat with us. But yeah, it was time, man. So Rhys hit us up. He's the marketing manager. He's organising all of our content. He's helping us elevate the brand into becoming what we know it deserves to become. And he said, man, we need to do a podcast. And Rhys, I think for people who know CMBT, they know maybe that Volks, or Alex Volkanovski, who's the UFC featherweight champion, is a co-owner of the brand. And for the most part, he's been our major ambassador along with so many other incredible human beings. And for whatever reason, we just felt as though, you know, he can live as the face of the brand, and we kind of just do our things in the background, but which is fantastic. But you kind of said, nah, look, it's time to do a podcast. It's time to allow our audience and our community to sort of get to know us behind the brand as well, and have those genuine and authentic conversations. And so you've brought us here, and that's exactly what we're doing. So I appreciate that.
No worries, man. Yeah, like I think what you said about how it comes back to authenticity and having these conversations. And, you know, we talk often about what we want the brand, what we want CMBT to be, what we want our community to get out of our products, and as well as, you know, we're constantly talking about keeping ourselves aligned with the mission, which is to help people find and fuel their bravery and do things that are challenging, step out of their comfort zone, and we're all about perpetuating that culture. So I think the podcast was, you know, it really came from the session we had recently about, you know, where we want the brand to be going and what we want it to be achieving in terms of helping people feel empowered. And certainly one of those, you know, pillars of the brand and the mission of Combat is to help people understand, you know, and keep an open dialogue around everything, especially, you know, the conversations that might not be so hard to have, like mental health, like the darker side of performance, where, you know, everyone gets into, you know, everyone, even as athletes and humans, we all get into a rut sometimes. So it's good to have these chats, and just, I think, connect with the community for sure.
Let me start on that note then, bro, and I'll get straight to it, and I'll get deep and vulnerable and authentic with you, because that's what we want to use this platform for, and we want to help people become more comfortable to have these conversations. Man, the reality is I've been having a really tough time over the last sort of month. And there's natural ebbs and flows with energy in everyone's lives, and I just happen to be in one of those downflows, and that's just because I feel like every single day at work I'm having to have hard conversations with business partners or team members, staff, and all these sorts of things, and it's just the reality of being a business owner. And a lot of the time it can really take its toll on you, and I've really felt it. But something that got me out of this funk recently, and I'll only say in the last couple of days, was something that you shared with me, and I'm really excited and interested to go into this. And I'll explain what that is, but everyone sort of says to you, if you're feeling down or if you're sort of, you know, struggling, change your environment or make sure that you're surrounding yourself with positive people. Hopefully you've got a support system, and I'm lucky to have all of those things. I have a supportive partner who cares about me deeply and will do anything to try and help me build my mood back. I have the gym community, I have fitness outlets, all these sorts of things. But sometimes it's just not enough.
Yeah.
And that might sound crazy to some people, but it just still doesn't get me out of my funk. And sometimes it's when a stranger says something in a particular way that catches your ears and for whatever reason sends a message that resonates with you and allows you to change your psyche and take you out of a down state back into maybe more of a neutral or positive state. And that's what happened to me. And the person who was a stranger was your dad. And so your old man has a podcast. What's it called?
It's called the Roaring Heads podcast.
The Roaring Heads podcast.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, Rhys's dad was correct me if I'm wrong here, a world-class triathlete, became a coach, coaches world-class triathletes, so was an athlete and now is a coach to high-level athletes himself, so understands performance. And he's also qualified in psychotherapy.
Yeah, so he's a qualified psychotherapist and hypnotherapist.
And a specialization in visualization and all these sorts of things. And you sent me one of his podcasts and it really resonated with me. And there was a couple of sort of topics that he spoke about which really hit me. I actually wrote some down and I thought that it'd be worth sort of sharing with you. I wrote some notes down from what he said, and he may have been referencing other psychologists and other professions in the field, but this is one thing that he said which I wanted to share with all of you guys and you, Rhys. Man needs difficulties, they are necessary for health. Neurosis is the natural byproduct of pain avoidance. The greatest and most important problems in life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. And when I started to hear those things, I kind of got a sense of what my problems were and realized, hey, I just need to snap out of this sort of negative headspace that I'm in. I need to compartmentalize all of these things that I consider to be negative and instead overcome them, try and become a better person for them, enjoy the experience and the growth that I'm going to experience out of these things. And just by doing that and sort of like accepting my current reality and finding gratitude and things like that, I was able to pull myself out of this headspace.
Totally.
So I appreciate you sending that to me.
No worries, man. Like, I'm very, very, very fortunate to have grown up in an environment with my old man and my mum that was very open and always encouraging conversations about mental health. Like, it was never taboo. There was never anything that I felt like I couldn't talk to my parents about. And that particular podcast resonated with me as well because, as you said, Dad is he's a triathlon coach, so he sort of built a triathlon squad around where we grew up in Lennox, which is where I grew up. And we had all these world-class athletes coming in and coming to stay with us and everything. And Dad was always super involved with the athletes in terms of their preparation, their training, obviously, setting their programs and going to the sessions with them. But so much of the work that he did was helping them with their mental prep, because that's really what he gravitated towards, I think. And even, he's helped me countless times in my, during my competitive career in amateur martial arts as well. Certainly what you touched on there about acceptance is such a big one, because for me, especially for my personality type, I tend to avoid pain. Yep. Like, I avoid discomfort, especially like in the emotional sense.
Yep.
And what you touched on about, we feel so, you can feel overwhelmed, you can feel clouded in by everything that's going on around you. And even though on paper you might look at, all right, my job's going great, my relationship's going great, I've got a great social circle, whatever, things can still sort of feel as if you're
balanced.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I think being in touch with what's going on and having that ability to look inwards and sit with your pain and really, or sit with your, the old man calls it like your suffering. Mm-hmm. Everybody suffers, sitting with it, really getting to know it and not avoiding it and doing all these things that we're so accustomed to in our modern lives, like the doom scroll, video games, exercise. If you use exercise to avoid your shit, like everyone talks about how good it is to get in the gym and like get your sweat on, get a pump on, whatever. But if you're using that as a crutch, like he talks about in that podcast, a crutch to get away from the actual problems, and you're not looking within and going deep into it, then you're really just pushing it down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, avoidance can have some seriously negative consequences on our well-being.
Yeah.
And you don't even know when you're avoiding sometimes. Sometimes it takes exactly that conversation from a stranger, listening to a podcast or seeing something on a TV show that actually makes you sit and reflect and go, hold on, that's resonated with me on some level.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a skill to be able to go, okay, why did that just make me have an emotional reaction the way that it did? You know what I mean?
100%. I'm a huge advocate for consuming content intentionally, and I think that not only to succeed in life do you need an information advantage, but also you find yourself, if you're consuming content, you find yourself learning from people who become mentors that you might not even know personally, and they're going to help you through things and help you unlock things that you didn't know that you needed to unlock just by consuming that content. And if you're feeling in a state where you might not have the answers to things, or you're feeling a little bit in limbo or in an imbalance, I'd recommend you to sort of encourage you to sort of consume some content with some people who may be experts in that area. And this might be something that they say that kind of helps you get out of that funk. And it's definitely something that I do if I'm feeling in a little bit of a state. Consume some content of some some podcasts that might be well known or might not be well known, and sometimes things that people say just really just like sort of change my mentality and help me sort of keep progressing and growing in life. And I think that we see it all the time, and especially being so involved in a mixed martial arts gym. I know a lot of you guys listening to the podcast might not be involved in mixed martial arts, and that's fine. It could just be a normal gym, but specifically for a mixed martial arts gym, there is a lot more sort of volume of maybe a little bit of imbalances or some ego imbalances and all these sorts of things, which makes it really interesting.
Yeah.
And when you spend enough time in a mixed martial arts gym, it's almost like a bit of a psychology degree, especially when you are someone that's managing people within that space. And just what we were talking about, I feel like the easiest part is for these guys and girls to come in and perform and do the tasks that they need to do, but it seems to be everything outside of that space, that performance space, that affects them and that they really struggle with, and they let affect everything else in their life, whether it's relationships or all these sorts of things. Did you feel when you were a competitive athlete, obviously still are, but more so competitive within your boxing career, that did your dad help you through phases where you may have been suffering with some things that affected your training performance or life performance, and give you some tools to sort of work around those sorts of things?
Yeah, certainly. My amateur career in amateur boxing was definitely like a roller coaster ride. I speaking pretty much exactly to what I mentioned before about using sport as a crutch or as an escape, or and really, my mental health during those, it was an interesting time, like during my early adolescence when I was competing, because I was, 19, 20, 21, 22 maybe. And it's really a time of your life where you're learning about what kind of person you are, and you're experiencing all these new things, myself moving up from a small town to the Gold Coast, jumping straight into, a new gym, starting uni. It was the first time I lived out of home, and I actually moved up here by myself. I didn't live with any friends or anything. So the whole experience was quite intense, and certainly my old man was able to offer me lots of guidance when I needed it most. But I had a lot of trouble, especially with anxiety, really bad anxiety. I was undiagnosed ADHD, which was super interesting way to live. I sort of look back on my life then, and I feel it was very it was very fast and intense, but it was also like super enjoyable and awesome. But looking back on it now, as someone I've done a lot more work on myself now, and had help with therapy and that sort of thing, and also some medication to help with my ADHD as well. My anxiety is a lot more in check, but now I can really easily look at the patterns that happened when I was competitive in terms of filling up my day with as much as humanly possible, so I had as little time to sort of sit and think and introspect as possible. So for instance, an example for a day that I would do when I was at uni was, I was a full-time student. I would go and work the dawn shift at Muecke's from 4 a.m. till 8 a.m, have a McMuffin or whatever. Then I'd drive over to a cafe where I was working at, where I was doing cashy jobs, and I'd work there from 9 till maybe 4 or 3 or 4, and then I'd do whatever uni work I had to do for a couple of hours or have a sleep because I was obviously quite exhausted, and then I would drive to the gym, the boxing gym where I was training, and train for an hour and a half. So sort of I had these mental patterns that, like you said, like the external stuff that happens during your training, certainly as an athlete and someone who was more insecure or anxious like I was, I think patterns form where you look to other people to sort of help you, or look to other avenues to help you sort of feel good or avoid those bad feelings. Like, if I was in the gym, I was like, all right, I'm always focused on, I'm constantly improving, I'm constantly leveling up. I'm always trying to push the boundaries, be the hardest worker in their gym, impress my coach, impress my teammates. And then, when that's, especially for someone like me, when I left the gym, like I felt great in the gym, but then I'd leave the gym and I'd just be anxious and especially if I had something like a really bad session, I'd leave the gym and I'd be in my car and I would just be like, I'm not cut out for this. That was a terrible session. I'm so embarrassed. Like I had a shit spar. Terrible performance. Like I felt fatigued. That was rubbish. And this would just be a cycle all day. So I was at my job just thinking about how bad I was doing at training, or maybe I was doing good. And I spent a lot of time in the workplace outside of training or in uni just thinking about, ruminating is the right word because it was certainly rumination, just ruminating over and over about all the things that I didn't like about myself, the things that I wish I was better at, instead of being present in each moment of what I was doing and really looking inwards and seeing the problem for what it was, which was all it was that I wasn't in touch with myself on a deep level. Like I didn't really look inwards and go like, why am I feeling all these super intense things? Because, the reality is all the avoidance, it just builds and builds and builds, and eventually, that sort of thing is one of the reasons why I ended up quitting boxing, because the lifestyle was so intense, because I had no way to turn down all the noise that was happening in my life. Because, whether it was I didn't have the skills, I didn't have the ability to sit in stillness, which is been a super important thing for me developing as a person. The ability to sit in stillness, to look inwards, to look at all your shit, to look at all the trauma that's happened to you, to look at all the rubbish, all the insecurities and all the shitty things that you say about yourself, or all the shitty things that you think other people are saying about you, and really go deep into it and just recognize that it's all just a story. It's all just a story, man. And that's what we do. We create these narratives and these stories, and it just builds and builds.
Something that your dad says in the podcast was that a lot of our reality is actually conditioned based on our experiences in the past.
Yeah.
So if we have negative experiences in our past, we often bring them and create them as our present reality. And I think that was just so fascinating.
Yeah,
and
sure.
He gives, obviously, sitting in stillness, understanding self-awareness and positive self-talk and things like that can help you disassociate negative experiences that you've had in the past, so that you can find peace and gratitude within your present. And 100%. I think that is so fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think that your struggle with anxiety is not uncommon. I think that it is scarily too common in today's society, and especially with young people. And there's probably so many reasons why, you know, our young people are suffering with such bad anxiety. But at the same time, I think the voice of mindfulness and self-awareness and the things that we're learning about how to discover mindfulness and how to, you know, stop and think with, sit with your thoughts, and you talked about rumination and things like that. The voice is becoming a lot more loud in terms of those concepts. It's something that I don't think that the generations before us spent a lot of time sort of practicing. I asked my parents and my grandparents, like, do you ever think about do you sit with your thoughts? Do you do a lot of meditation or any self-awareness practices, mindfulness and things? And they all kind of just say, no, not really. And I found that quite interesting. But obviously people are getting more quote unquote deep in today's society, and it's creating some amazing things, but it's also got its negative cycles to it as well. The other thing from the podcast that I loved was, if you are not conscious about what sort of future you desire, then you don't have a future. You're not moving towards a future. And I think that that's really fascinating. And something that I picked up from watching a Jake Paul documentary on Netflix recently, which I thought was fascinating as well, was him, or it may have even been Logan, referring to themselves openly as being full-on delusional, but saying they wouldn't have been able to achieve the incredible and unimaginable things that they have unless they did have a sense of delusion.
Totally.
And so that there is this balance to live in, which is so fascinating, which is, if you can match your sense of delusion with relentless action, you can achieve the things that you quote unquote are delusional about. And then it's no longer delusion, it becomes reality. And so I think that this is such an important lesson to learn when sort of sitting there and having some dreams for what you want to achieve in the future, and the gravity and magnitude of those dreams, and is it possible, and but it's the self-belief, and it's having self-esteem, and it's then taking action. It's being brave to take the action that allows you to sort of take the steps that need to be taken to achieve those dreams,
100%.
that original delusional goal. And that's sort of what we're all about here. You know, and I think that this is so powerful to talk about this. I can speak from personal experience, even relating to this business, CMBT. There's been many times where I've spoken to people in different friends groups and told them about our goals for this business, and have had people who've had much greater experience in business and life than I have tell me that I'm thinking too small. And how important that was of an experience for me, because you then start to see other levels of opportunity in your life, and you break boxes and you break ceilings, you break through ceilings, which I think is so important. And for these people who have achieved these things to tell me, no, man, you can go bigger, let's go, you can do more, you can have more impact. You know, this can be more valuable than what you're planning for it to be. But my plan in my head was delusional. My plan was grand. And these people have already reached what I assume was a level of grandeur. And now they've helped me break that ceiling and look towards even greater goals. And I think that that's been an important lesson for me. Maybe there was some self-sabotage there, almost holding myself back, because I would think to myself, who do you think you are that you think that you can achieve these amazing things? And then maybe that's my little toxic trait. And then having people within these circles tell me, no, like, you need to break that wall, and you can achieve these things. And how powerful it is to have people around you, or for you to seek out people in those spaces to help you realize, you know, the different levels that there are to living and life and business and relationships and all these sorts of things.
100%.
What do you think about that?
Well, definitely, man. Like, that's so... it puts things into such perspective when you hear those sorts of people who have done super well for themselves going like, you mustn't be afraid to dream a little bigger, darling. Like, certainly. And I think what you touched on there about, you know, self-judgment. You know, we've all got that sort of, that thing inside us that it exactly what you said, like, who are you to want these things? Who are you, like, to think, like, that you can do this, like, get over yourself, almost, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think there is, talking about balance in general, you know, another thing that my old man always taught me was that the fear of failure, especially, you know, but it, you know, as an athlete was the context that it was given to me, but the fear of failure in anything, like, I don't know who it was that said that your dream should scare you.
Yep.
But, you know, the fear of failure is the thing that drives a lot of us forward. If you don't care about failing, you don't really give a shit, do you?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the drive to succeed in fear of failure is certainly, it's something it's sacred.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that should be really looked at as a tool, I think, and then balancing it with the self-judgment that keeps you, you know, wants to keep you locked up, wants to keep you safe,
Yep.
wants to keep you out of harm's way from being embarrassed. Striking that balance is super important.
He also talks about a lot of people and relating to athletes as well, try and make things so perfect and continue to try and make things so perfect within their training schedules and their life and things that because they fear failure,
Yeah.
but so much so that they're focusing on creating all these things to be perfect, but then they're not taking the actions that are necessary to actually keep progressing within their career.
Yeah.
So it's just like their mindsets are on like planning and preparation of training programs and
Data
and doing all these things, but they're not actually getting in there and maybe competing or doing the things necessary to progress.
And being in the moment,
Yep.
especially. The thing, you know, you can plan everything down to a T, but some days you just have a shit day, whether you're at work or you're in the gym or whatever it is you're doing. And the value of being present and really in the moment and being in your body when you're doing these things, when you're putting in the reps, so to speak, which means that when you get to game day or race day or fight day or the big presentation you've got to do, you've practiced over and over and over being in the moment. You haven't been in your training or your preparation thinking about, oh, I want this to go right and then this will be right and then I'll have the perfect setup and everything will be organized, and you're thinking about that while you're training or doing whatever it is, or you're fantasizing about it going perfectly, or you're fantasizing about it going terribly. When you're in the process and you're really deep into it, that's when you're preparing yourself for the big day, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Really being in it.
It really is the power of like manifestation, right? It's just like if you are manifesting that the negative is going to happen, there is a real chance in the reality that the negative is going to happen.
Yeah.
Whereas if you are manifesting that the best case scenario is going to happen, you are most likely closer to achieving the best case outcome.
100%.
And this comes down to the concept of self-esteem, or just the reality of self-esteem. Tell me, what does your inner voice say to you? Do you hear your inner voice? Do you talk to it often? Do you allow it to sort of dictate what happens in your life, or do you just not hear it at all?
I certainly used to. Everything that I did and felt and the way that I conducted myself was based on the thoughts that were going on in my head, and certainly now.
And what were the thoughts? Well, you just mentioned it before. They were negative.
100%. Well, for instance, whatever I was doing in terms of, you know, if it was uni or if it was for training, and I was thinking about whatever I was doing in my preparation, I'd have a thing in my head that said, you're not doing that well enough, you should be doing this instead. You know, because especially as, you know, an athlete or someone who's trying to achieve something that's quite phenomenal, there's so much info that you can intake. You know, you got people around you telling you what you should be doing. There's all sorts of people that you look up to who all got to where they are through different paths, different routes. And I think that if you try and, if you take everyone's advice in, and you're trying to make your journey exactly the same as something that worked for somebody else, like, fuck, that we're all so different. Like, there's no cookie cutter option for this. You really have to, we're all on our own journey, and we'll all get to the places that we're going to go. And if you're not paying attention to how you got there and you're too busy trying to do it like someone else, then you're really putting yourself in a tricky position. And yeah, like what you said about, that's how my inner voice worked. And certainly now it's a lot easier for me to, the best advice I ever got was from my dad that said, you are not your thoughts.
Yep.
And I went through my whole adolescence thinking that meant one thing, but I think only in these last 2 years, I think I really understand what it means. And something that you can put in practice that I look at and go, oh, I wish I understood this when I was, a younger man, when I was a young man at uni or when I was training or whatever, was that your thoughts, they're just going to happen. Like, you don't control your thoughts. They just come up. And all you can do is watch them. All you can do is watch them and be in your body and be in your feelings and watch the thoughts come. But as soon as you start, if you think about it as if I had someone sitting next to me saying that, like, this podcast is going terribly, you really need to fix it up, you really need to start talking about this, or you really need to start talking about that or whatever. If it was someone else sitting there, I'd just be like, can you shut the fuck up and let me do what I'm doing?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But when it's in our own heads and we've got this voice coming from a negative space that's saying, like, you're doing a shit job, you need to be doing it like this, you need to be doing it like that, everyone, like, gets wrapped up in it. But I think if you really look at your thoughts as if they're someone else entirely, it's just another voice telling you what you should be doing. But really, like, it's not you, and you shouldn't get wrapped up in it. And you can look at your thoughts and acknowledge that they're there, but just keep doing what you're doing. Like, if you know the formula of hard work and you know the formula of staying present and just chipping away, you know what I mean? And you're not getting wrapped up in the thoughts that come from your internal, then you really get far ahead.
If you find yourself grabbing onto those thoughts and making them one with your body, you can suffer the consequences. Or, on the other end of the spectrum, you can achieve great things in a sense, right? Because like, it depends what's going through your head. If you've got negative things in your head saying, this person hates me, or they're saying stuff about me, or I feel like I'm doing a shit job, and then you allow those thoughts to become one with your body, that's when your emotions start reflecting the thoughts that are in your head. And once you're reflecting negative emotions, it's going to proceed to negative actions and negative outcomes, and that is going to be, the outcome of your foreseeable future until you can change that around. And vice versa is, hey, if you're filling your mind with positive thoughts and you want to grab that thought and make it one with your body, and then you're oozing positivity and good energy and high frequency, you're attracting it back, your actions are positive, you're moving forward, you've got that momentum, then great things start to happen.
100%.
And I think it's a habit, and it's a skill. It's a skill that becomes a habit, what you said, but it's a skill that needs to be practiced daily, which is allowing thoughts to come in and out, grabbing one that you want to grab, and making it one with your body, or letting it go and pass by. And my little thought process to that is about building an inner speech, which is like a shield for you. I talk about my self-esteem as a shield, and I don't know where mine came from, but I've always been lucky enough to have self-esteem to a sense, and it's helped me push through the hardest times in my entire life. The funny thing about it is that I grew up in a traditional European household where my grandparents are from Croatia. They're very superstitious. They have all these crazy concepts and things like, don't talk to yourself because you'll turn crazy, or don't have a smile for too long, the wind will change and it'll get stuck on your face, or just all these sorts of things. And so anytime I would sort of hear a voice in my head, I would try and drown it out, because I thought that I would become crazy if I practice any sort of discussions with my own head.
100%.
Then you start to realize over time that the most important thing is to hone in on the direction and frequency of the discussion that you're having with the voice in your head.
Yeah.
And from a young age, I got it to a point where all it was saying was positive things, and it's helped me through immense issues. And I'm happy to say it now, because it's not an egotistical thing, because it's not something that I'm saying out loud. It's something that I'm saying to myself in the privacy of my own space, and it's allowing me to move forward against negative things that are happening to me. And I would say things like, you're the best, you're the greatest, you're the kindest, you're the most generous, you're the leader in this place, like, you can do it. If anyone can do it, you can do it. And I would say these things to myself, so that anytime a negative thought would come in there, I would be like, nah, get lost, like, nah, that's not me, nah, piss off, like, whatever, like, and I would be able to deflect negative thoughts. Of course, over time, the more complicated life becomes, the more you build into your life, the more responsibility you have, the more that voice comes in, and it's hard to battle against. So there's going to be times where you're just going to find yourself in a downward cycle, but you know, I think the most important thing is to bring yourself back up. And I think what's so fascinating is a lot of us that suffer with those sorts of things, or maybe even further, where it becomes a mental imbalance or something that requires even medication. You openly talked about you take medication for ADHD and all these sorts of things, which is vulnerable to talk about, but so necessary. Something I find fascinating is watching Tyson Fury's new show on Netflix, and how sort of open they are about displaying mental illness. And I think it's fascinating, and I'm not sure whether people are talking about it right now, or whether it's kind of going a bit under the radar for now, because it's such a big public figure. But you are literally witnessing, and it's on display, mental illness in its truest form. It's someone that is out of control of their ability to change their emotions, unfortunately. Now, most of us take that for granted. We have a down day, the next day we can pop back up, and we might feel down, and we know that we can just chuck some positive stimulus in our life, or change our environment, or whatever it might be, and we can find ourselves back in a positive space. But for someone like, for example, Tyson, he's out of control of it, and it might just be one thing that flips his balance out entirely. And it's a really difficult thing to deal with. And my sort of definition of like what a mental imbalance is when it actually starts affecting your ability to become an active member of society. It stops you from being able to make sensible decisions and care for your own health and things like that. That's when I think it becomes a point where this is a mental illness, this is something that you're suffering with, and we need to get you help for that.
100%.
But I just think it's fascinating to watch it all happen on TV, and I fully commend that family for being so open about it.
100%.
And literally using it as entertainment for people, but it's also a bit of an educational lesson at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, you know, that show is so cool. In terms of what you said about, like, I almost feel like grateful that, you know, they've made this show happen, and it's certainly given me an insight into, you know, like, Tyson is, there's only one Tyson Fury. Like, I'm such a Tyson Fury fan. Like, to me, he's an absolute fucking legend. A legend of the sport. And it was so, I really had no idea about the severity, you know, of bipolar, in terms of, you know, it really shines a light on what it's like for someone to deal with, and it's something for his whole family that they collaboratively, through acceptance of their present situation as well, like, no one's pretending that it's not happening. They're all there, they're all accepting it, they're all supporting each other as well. So there's just this ecosystem of support that everyone's uplifting each other, and when the times are shit, it's shit, and that's okay. And when the times are good, we're flying with it, we're vibing with it. You know, his wife always talks about, like, he's up now, we're just gonna keep it going, keep it rolling, make the most of it, I think. But yeah, as you said, it's very cool that something like that sort of topic on the topic of mental health is out there, like on Netflix. Anyone can go and watch it, and I highly recommend everyone go and watch it, because if for no other reason, then it's super entertaining and super awesome, and they're a great group of characters.
I think something that I've always said, which I feel strongly about, is that our mind is such a paradox. It is both so strong and so fragile at the same time. And I think that people really need to consider their mental health on a daily basis and ensure that the things that they are doing are protecting the fragile nature of the mind, but then also doing difficult things to continue to strengthen the mind, or show how strong your mind is at the same time.
Absolutely.
And it's such a balance of things to get, but it could literally just be having a bad trip, taking some drugs that your body doesn't do well with, and all of a sudden you wake up and your balance is right out, and all of a sudden you're fucked. And to a certain degree, that's what happened to my mum. So something that I feel really passionate about and have accepted is the journey that I've been on, and what makes me feel comfortable about talking about mental illness and being an advocate for it as well, is my mum suffering with severe paranoid schizophrenia. She was a childhood actor who got stardom very quickly at a very young age. She was the original actor on the Puberty Blues movie, which turned into a Channel 10 series, which was awesome, and she did many other films, and she was flown around the world by Saudi princes and all sorts of crazy shit, which would have just been so wild for a girl that came from Croatia to Australia, didn't know a word of English, came into this, different cultural system, learnt English, and then became this childhood actor that, did all of these great things, but then dabbled with probably marijuana and drugs, as well as the pressure of fitting into a new culture. My grandparents are strict and have cultural influences in their own way, so there's this dichotomy of like survival within two different worlds. And then it's also the stresses of the industry, being in the entertainment industry and all those sorts of things. And it was only a matter of time for her to start suffering imbalances. And it became so bad to the point where, I don't know if any of you guys have seen the movie A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe, but it was that. It was hallucinations. It was her entire house was, every wall and part of the ceiling was covered with newspapers, because she would read the newspaper and see messages and codes in there, and she'd write in the newspaper and think it was about her and all those sorts of things, which is very frightening for someone. I grew up with my mum. She was a single parent all the way up until my 13th birthday, and it was to the point where I would get woken up in the middle of the night because she would say that someone had broken in and stabbed her with a needle, and she'd be trying to show me needle marks and all these sorts of things as a 5, 6, 10-year-old, whatever it might be. So it's a pretty full-on scary thing dealing with mental illness, and it's not something that people generally see on a daily basis. So I think that these shows and seeing these shows is actually great for our world, because it is showing that these things are out there, and it's not uncommon, it's common. And like, it shows how much we need to protect our brains and think about the health and well-being and longevity of our mind and our brains and things like that.
100%.
Yeah, so I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, man, that's, so unbelievable, your mum's story and your story coming back from growing up in that sort of environment. And then, I feel like for a lot of people who don't have the capacity to deal with that sort of thing. I know there's been times in my life where people I've loved have been through seriously hard times, and me being who I am, like I absorb it and take it on, and it's really it's hard to be around. I think a lot of people have trouble with that. I've had conversations with friends of mine whose partners have really struggle with one sort of mental illness or another, and myself, I've had a partner who's been through something similar, and there's a lot of guilt that happens from the partners end where it's like I'm playing the supportive role all the time and I'm feeling quite exhausted and it's bringing me down, and it's certainly hard to support someone all the time because you take it on. And I think it's such a credit to you as a person to have been through all of that and been, you know, such a support for your mum and your family, and really you took extreme ownership of your own mental health in terms of, you know, I'm not going to let this stop me from realizing who I am and realizing my true potential. And I think, you know, no matter what's happening around us, you can always reach out a hand for help, and you can always look deep inwards and really be there for yourself. Take the time to make sure that you're okay, to introspect, to do self-care, which isn't an easy thing a lot of the time, but really, you know, making sure that you've got the tools in place that you can check in with yourself and move on from the things that are really hard. You know what I mean?
100%. And then just like building a skill of reframing. So I think like there's two different camps, and you know, a lot of us go through trauma and we all have our own stories, but that's what makes us unique. And it's also what allows us to have empathy and for us to understand what others are going through in the world. And I think that understanding is what helps us progress through life, because no matter what you do in life, you're always dealing with relationships and energy exchanges and energy transactions in some form or another. And if you can't relate or understand or communicate with a person because of something that they've gone through, because of your lack of life experience or trauma or whatever it might be, then it only stops you from, you know, allowing you to progress. So I think being able to reframe and see your traumas or your negative past experiences as things as life experiences, like losses or failures are only learning type
100%.
understandings. And when you can start reframing to use those as fuel to help you advance in life, I think that's how you can become successful. And there's two camps. If someone goes through trauma, someone will use that as with a victim mentality, no matter how bad it is. It could be the worst thing that could ever happen to you. And I feel for those who have gone through things that are worse than I have and you have. But we still have to live. Like we no matter how bad that is, like we still need to find a way to reframe it, and almost, if we have to, trick ourselves into making it feel like it was something that was meant to happen for us. As bad as it sounds, I feel comfortable saying to you guys that my mum committing suicide because of severe paranoid schizophrenia has been a blessing in my life, because I understand a level of trauma that maybe not many people have experienced, you know, and I use that as my superpower.
100%.
Of course, I wish that didn't happen, and I wish that she was here with us today, but I can't control that. What I can control now is how I use that to help me fuel what happens for the rest of my life. And I think that's something that we all, I'm an advocate for us all using traumas or negative experiences or even little failures as something that can help propel us forward. And so all that just comes down to framing.
100%.
And comes back to us protecting our minds, and sometimes we have to trick our minds.
Absolutely. And you know, when you do like a cognitive reframe, sometimes it feels like you're lying to yourself. And you have a judgmental voice inside of your head that comes from whatever place and says like, you're full of shit, this isn't reality. But, you know, when these things happen to us and you're in like a mindset and that makes you feel like you're bringing yourself down and you feel like you can't come back. You know, I like what you said about tricking yourself. Really, it's just no matter what happens, no matter, you know, what happens to you, like what you've just said, I can't even imagine that happening, but you're able to reframe that and use that as in a positive way. And I'm 100% positive that you don't spend any time dwelling on, oh, what if that didn't happen, or what if that didn't happen, because you're always just accepting what's happened to you and moving forward. And another principle that I think is really important is about having an internal locus of control, which is like a psychological principle that talks about how it's one of the main determinants of happiness is whether you look at the things that happen to you and you go, that was fucked up, that person did wrong by me, if that didn't happen I would be better, and it's all external and it's all blame and regret in the external sense. But if it's internal and you take responsibility in whatever ways that you can, you look at, maybe if I didn't, if it's something that happened bad in a relationship, if it's something that happened that you didn't want to happen in your career or your sporting career or whatever it is, and you can look at it with an internal locus of control and say, like, I take responsibility and I have control of the things that happen to me, and I choose how I'm going to react to these things.
Yeah.
I choose. I'm not going to let the things around me determine how I feel about myself, feel about other people, and that's a much more, in my opinion, stable way and sustainable way of living, positively or happily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Far out. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
I think that's so important. I'm so glad that the first episode that we've done together is quite deep, and we're talking about very vulnerable things, but I hope that some of the things that we've chatted about, and I can't wait to listen back to it, help people, similar to how I explained your dad's podcast helped me in going, wow, I listened to these guys who maybe I can relate to, and something that they've said to me has stuck with me, and it's helped me reframe things, and I was feeling quite down, but I'm going to use that as fuel to make me feel a lot better.
And hopefully they can feel like someone could feel like they could have a conversation about something. Maybe they've put themselves in a bit of a vulnerable situation.
Yeah.
Because if you're not vulnerable and you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing.
Yeah.
Really.
100%.
These are the things that make us grow when you look inwards and you take these things and you use them as fuel, if you will.
Definitely. And this is the impact that I want us to have with CMBT Nutrition. I think that I have always wanted this to be a vehicle that supersedes just nutritional products or a gym or an online app or anything like that. I want this to be a vehicle that impacts people, and like in our mission, as it states, to help people eat better, move more, be more mindful, and create connection with a community that believes what they believe. And if we can achieve all of those things, if we can unlock all of those pillars, then that's going to help us unlock our bravery. And bravery is what we need to conquer adversity. And conquering adversity is what we need to do if we want to grow and do some things and become successful, whatever that might be. So this is our whole ethos around, our business. And this podcast, I want to be another pillar that allows us to promote and become advocates for, mindfulness. And we're just going to share our own experiences, and we're going to talk about things that are happening in culture right now, and we're going to get guests on board, and we're going to do chat about all sorts of things. But the one thing that I want us to be is authentic and vulnerable, and say whatever we think needs to be said.
100%.
Another thing that I found interesting, you brought up the fact that from something that we're both passionate about fighting and UFC, you brought up that one of the girl that fought Holly Holm got... Yeah. What happened with that?
She failed her pre-fight drug test. The substance that was found in her system was consistent with her ADHD medication.
Wow. So
that's only sort of just happened at this stage. It's not really, they haven't really come out and said whether or not what's going to happen going forward, but it was, she especially was quite vulnerable with the announcing the news. She made this post on Instagram that says she's never in her life taken a substance to enhance ability in or out of the cage. She's tested positive for a substance consistent with ADHD prescription medication. It's quite incredible because you look at the things that are in these medications that, I take my medication every day. It helps me function. It helps me to be normal, almost. At this stage, it certainly does. And she said herself that she stops taking it the week of the fight so that this doesn't happen. And even just that, I'm like, if I didn't take my meds for a week, I'd be in I'd be having a hard time.
Yeah.
Yeah, really hard time. I couldn't even imagine fighting and not having them, you know, like, especially when you're on something regularly. But it is definitely something that's interesting that has to be looked at from, I think, an empathetic standpoint. You know, you look at all the comments on Instagram and everyone's like, you're a fucking cheater, like, no one's buying it, like, this is just bullshit. You know, maybe it'll comes out that something else is in our system, I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
But when someone's just takes something that helps them get through the day and then, you know, been pinged for it by the USDA, like, that's crazy.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
Mm.
How fascinating. Well, yeah, we'll definitely keep an eye on that. Talking about, obviously, banned it's a huge thing. It's a huge topic. It's something that we can discuss later. And I don't necessarily want to make this about our products. I want to make it about things that you know, information and stories that give value to people. Not that our products don't, they very much do, but our products are banned substance tested for this reason.
Yeah.
You know, we did it because Alex Volkanovski, who's a UFC featherweight champion, was our first ambassador, and for him to take the products in the UFC, he needed them to be banned substance tested.
Yeah.
And along the journey, it's become a real strength for us. And it shows, you know, the quality of our products, the transparency in formulation, and allows people to feel comfortable that what they're taking is genuinely the product and the ingredients that are in the label. So I'm really proud that we're able to, you know, share with people that our products are all banned substance tested as well. And so I feel for her that, you know, she's taking something that is prescribed to her for, you know, something that she needs to function.
Something that she struggles with every
literally.
day. Yeah.
But you know, it's one of those crazy things we need to keep our eye on. But Rhys, it's been phenomenal, brother. I am excited to continue this on a weekly basis. I think you'll find, obviously you said this is your first podcast. Something that's so beautiful about this moment is that we can just turn off our phones for an hour and we can have a genuine conversation. 100%. I hope you feel good when we leave this room for what we've discussed, and I hope that everyone that's listening, if you've listened this far, we appreciate that very much. And I hope you've got something out of it too. So thanks for sticking around and supporting, guys. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and Rhys and I will see you next week.
Thanks, brother. It's been amazing.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks for listening, guys. Cheers.